For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bailey Sincox, and I'm a senior here in the English department. Just finished a thesis, so I feel like a real member of the English department now. I'm very excited about that. Thank you, Elizabeth. I wanted to share with you all sort of the biography of this idea for this event, because it is sort of a funny story. And it began after the Nathaniel Mackey reading a few weeks ago, when President Brodhead was reminiscing to Priscilla Weld, a professor in the English department here, about an event sort of like that reading that happened periodically at Yale, when professors and students would come together and share poetry. And he said, "Priscilla, can you plan this event, next week?" And she said, "No, but I'm going to give it to Bailey." And just as the sort of genealogy of this was a passing on of ideas and a sharing of a genuine love for poetry and for language, we hope that this series, Bookmark, will be the first of many such events in the fall and in the years to come, for students and professors in the English department, and those who are outside of the department but love English and share in the pleasures of poetry, to come together and contribute poems that have touched their lives, that have marked a moment, that have made an experience or a feeling more intelligible to them. And so without further ado, President Brodhead, the brains behind this whole event, is going to be starting us off. So.
I am proud if I have originated the idea of this, but the whole point is that didn't happen often. When I was an undergraduate, the English department, I was an English major, every Wednesday some faculty member would read aloud from some poet they liked. And so that's where I first heard Whitman, that's where I first heard Hart Crane, many people I first heard. Poets who, when I read on pages, I didn't always get it, but when someone's voice would open it up for you. So I thought, what a great thing to do. And now, thanks to the wonders of Priscilla and the Bailey transmission mechanism, it has come to pass. So I'm going to read two poems that are meaningful to me. At this time of year, my heart is always laden with the spectacle of graduation. And so these are graduation poems. The first is, next week you have last day of classes, and so I'm going to read the only first day of classes poem that I'm familiar with. And the point about it is, I figure you undergraduates are about equidistant between the day you were dropped off for the first day of school and the day when you will have some hot little hand of a child and drop them off your child for the first day of school. And I love this poem because it gives a sense of how the things you learn when you're really little, these little arbitrary elements, A, B, C, and the rest, are the elements of which language and thus of which education and thus of which knowledge are made. But also it gives a sense that education is fraught. And to enter the passage of education is to enter a fraught space, but one that at the end maybe isn't so bad. You know this poem? September, the First Day of School by Howard Unwell. My child and I hold hands on the way to school, and when I leave him at the first grade door, he cries a little, but he's brave. He does let go. My selfish tears remind me how I cried before the door a life ago. I may have had a hard time letting go. Each fall, the children must endure together what every child also endures alone. Learning the alphabet, the integers, 36 bits and pieces of the stuff so arbitrary, so peremptory, that worlds invisible and visible bow down before it, as in Joseph's dream the sheaves bowed down, and then the stars bowed down before the dreaming of a little boy. That dream got him so much hatred of his brothers as cost the greater part of life to men, and yet great kindness came of it to repent. A school is where they grind the grain of thought, and grind the children who must grind the thought. It may be that these two grindings are but one, as from the alphabet come Shakespeare's plays, as from the integers come Euler's law, as from the whole inseparably the lives, the shrunken lives that have not been set free by law or by poetic fantasy, but may they be. My child has disappeared behind the schoolroom door, and should I live to see his coming forth a life away, I know my hope that do not know its form, nor hope to know it. May the fathers he finds among his teachers have a care of him more than his fatherhood. How that will look, I do not know. I do not need to know. Even our tears belong to ritual, but may great kindness come out of it in the end. My next one is from the world's only great graduation poem. This is Paradise Lost. Famous graduation of Adam from Eden View. And I just thought, it has a beautiful, lovely, lyrical, humanistic ending, but it comes after a passage of sort of growing sublimity, because the whole point is they didn't transition out. They didn't have an internship in life, They actually were excluded, expelled. And it seems to me, as I reread this, just something with the force of this harsh expulsion that's going to draw a boundary between you and one pleasant life which you'll never be able to return to, and the life that only opens up when you step out of it. So let me just read a little to get us started. This is the angel. Let us descend now from this top of speculation, for the hour precise exacts our parting hence, and see the guards by me encamped on yonder hill expect their motion, at whose front a flaming sword in signal of remove waves fiercely round. And then he tells Adam to go wake up Eve, and they have an exchange, and she gives the loveliest line that anyone ever said to anyone they loved. But now lead on, in me is no delay. With thee to go is to stay here, with thee to stay is to go hence and go. But so spake our mother Eve, and Adam heard well pleased, but answered not. For now too nigh the archangel stood, and from the other hill to their fixed station, all in bright array the cherubim descended, as on the ground, gliding meteorous as evening mist risen from the river over the marish glides, and gathers ground fast on the laborer's heel, homeward returning. You remember there's a million swamps, there are all of these dreadful fantasies of swamp gas gathering at your heels, returning. High in front advanced, the brandished sword of God before them blazed, fierce as a comet, while with torrid heat and vapor as the Libyan air of dust began to parch the temperate climate, even just shrivel up by the heat descending. Whereat in either hand the hastening angel caught our lingering parents, and to the eastern gate led them direct, and down the cliff as fast to the subjected plain, then disappeared. They looked back. All the eastern side beheld a paradise, so late their happy seat, waved over by that flaming brand, the gate with dreadful faces thronged and fiery arms. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide. They, hand in hand, with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way.
It's a poem by Tom Wayman that my students will recognize. Every student hears it. It's a poem about classrooms, and the one question that some student will inevitably ask: did I miss anything? Nothing. When we realized you weren't here, we sat with our hands folded on our desks in silence for the 2 full hours. Everything. I gave an exam worth 40% of the grade and assigned some reading due today, on which I'm about to hand out a quiz worth 50%. Nothing. None of the content of this course has value or meaning. Take as many days off as you like. Any activities we undertake as a class, I assure you, will not matter either to you or me, and are without purpose. Everything. A few minutes after we began, a shaft of light suddenly descended, and a heavenly being appeared and revealed to us what each woman and man must do to attain divine wisdom in this life and the hereafter. This is the last time the class will meet before we disperse to bring the good news to all people. Nothing. When you are present, how could something significant occur? everything. Contained in this classroom is a microcosm of human experience, assembled for you to query and examine and ponder. This is not the only place such an opportunity has been gathered, but it was one place, and you weren't here.
I'm going to read a poem by Seamus Heaney, who won the Nobel Prize some years ago. This is a poem called Seeing Things, which is also the title of the volume in which it's published. It's got 3 very short parts. And let me just explain that the first section takes place on the island of Inishbofin, which is just off the northern coast of Ireland, and is known for its medieval monasteries, which are ruins, but can be visited. The second takes place in Spain, and this particular scene is in front of a cathedral with carvings of the baptism of Jesus. And the third section is a recollection of a scene from Heaney's own life involving his father, who had passed away just before this poem was written, and indeed is kind of the anchor of it. And I'll mention that the word bluestone that appears in it is in fact the name of a fungicide used to treat potato fields, something that's a lot more important for the Irish than it might be for us. Seeing things. Inishbofin on a Sunday morning, sunlight, turf smoke, seagulls, boat slip, diesel. One by one, we were being handed down into a boat, dipped and shilly-shallied scarsomely every time. We sat tight on short cross benches in nervous 2s and 3s, obedient, newly close, nobody speaking except the boat as the gunwales sank and seemed they might ship water any minute. The sea was very calm, but even so, when the engine kicked and our ferryman swayed for balance, reaching for the tiller, I panicked at the shiftiness and heft of the craft itself. What guaranteed us that quick response and buoyancy in the swim kept me in agony. All the time as we went sailing evenly across the deep, still, seeable down into water, it was as if I looked from another boat sailing through air far up and could see how riskily we fared into the morning and loved in vain our bare, bowed, numbered heads. Part 2. Claritas. The dry-eyed Latin word is perfect for the carved stone of the water, where Jesus stands up to his unwet knees and John the Baptist pours out more water over his head. All this in bright sunlight on the facade of a cathedral. Lines hard and thin and sinuous represent the flowing river. Down between the lines, little antic fish are all ago, nothing else. And yet in that utter visibility, the stone's alive with what's invisible. Waterweed, stirred sand grains hurrying off, the shadowy, unshadowed stream itself. All afternoon, heat wavered on the steps, and the air we stood up to our eyes in wavered like the zigzag hieroglyph for life itself. Final part. Once upon a time, my undrowned father walked into our yard. He had gone to spray potatoes in a field on the riverbank and wouldn't bring me with him. The horse sprayer was too big and newfangled. Bluestone might burn me in the eyes. The horse was fresh. I might scare the horse, and so on. I threw stones at a bird on the shed roof, as much for the clatter of the stones as anything. But when he came back, I was inside the house and saw him out the window, scatter-eyed and daunted, strange without his hat, his step unguided, his ghosthood imminent. When he was turning on the riverbank, the horse had rusted and reared up and pitched cart and sprayer and everything off balance, so the whole rig went over into a deep whirlpool. Hoofs, chains, shafts, cartwheels, barrel and tackle, all tumbling off the world, and the hat already merrily swept along the quieter reaches. That afternoon, I saw him face to face. He came to me with his damp footprints out of the river, and there was between us nothing there that might not still be happily ever after.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Nadler, and I'm a senior here at Duke. And I will be reading Under the Tree by Denise Levertov. Under an orange tree, not one especial singular orange tree, but one among the dark multitude. Recline there, with a stone wine jar, and the sense of another dream concentration would capture. But it doesn't matter. And the sense of dust on the grass, of infinitesimal flowers, of cracks in the earth, and urgent life passing there, ants and transparent winged beings in their intensity traveling from blade to blade. Under a modest orange tree, neither lower nor taller, neither darker leaved nor glow more beneficently than the dark multitude, glowing in numberless lanes. The orange farmer counts, but not you. Recline and drink wine. The stone will keep it cold. With the sense of life yet to be lived. Rest, rest, the grass is growing. Let the oranges ripen above you. You are living too. One among the dark multitude.
Hi, I'm Christina, a student, faculty member in the English department. My choice is interesting. It sort of dovetails with the school, or not. It's actually about knowledge, not so much the school. But I also wanted to say, I can never hear about Paradise Lost without thinking about something a student said to me once about when he was very young, and he was told that his mother was reading a Bible story to him and told him about the story of Genesis and how Adam and Eve were driven from paradise. He had in his mind a picture of the two of them in the backseat of a convertible, with the angel driving them out of paradise. Anyway, this is a poem by the great American poet Elizabeth Bishop. And it is set in Nova Scotia, where her grandparents were from and where she lived for a time as a child after her parents died. And this was written after she returned there after an absence of about 15 years at the fish houses. Although it is a cold evening, down by one of the fish houses, an old man sits netting his net. In the gloaming, almost invisible, a dark purple-brown, and his shuttle worn and polished. The air smells so strong of codfish it makes one's nose run and one's eyes water. The 5 fish houses have steeply peaked roofs, and narrow cleated gangplanks slant up to storerooms in the gables for the wheelbarrows to be pushed up and down on. All is silver. The heavy surface of the sea swelling slowly as if considering spilling over is opaque, but the silver of the benches, the lobster pots and masts scattered among the wild, jagged rocks is of an apparent translucence, like the small, old buildings with an emerald moss growing on their shoreward walls. The big fish tubs are completely lined with layers of beautiful herring scales, and the wheelbarrows are similarly plastered with creamy, iridescent coats of mail, with small, iridescent flies crawling on them. Up on the little slope behind the houses, set in the sparse, bright sprinkle of grass, is an ancient wooden capstan, cracked with 2 long bleached handles and some melancholy stains, like dried blood, where the ironwork has rusted. The old man accepts a lucky strike. He was a friend of my grandfather. We talk of the decline in the population of codfish and herring, while he waits for a herring boat to come in. There are sequins on his vest and on his thumb. He has scraped the scales, the principal beauty, from unnumbered fish with that black old knife, the blade of which is almost worn away. Down at the water's edge, at the place where they haul up the boats, up a long ramp, descending into the water, thin silver tree trunks are laid horizontally across the gray stones, down and down at intervals of 4 or 5 feet. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear. Element bearable to no mortal, to fish and to seals. One seal particularly I have seen here evening after evening. He was curious about me. He was interested in music. Like me, a believer in total immersion. So I used to sing him Baptist hymns. I also sang, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." He stood up in the water and regarded me steadily, moving his head a little. Then he would disappear, then suddenly emerge, almost in the same spot, with a sort of shrug, as if it were against his better judgment. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear. The clear, gray, icy water. Back behind us, the dignified tall firs begin, bluish, associating with their shadows. A million Christmas trees stand waiting for Christmas. The water seems suspended above the rounded gray and blue-gray stones. I have seen it over and over. The same sea, the same, slightly, indifferently swinging above the stones, icily above the stones, and then the world. If you should dip your hand in, your wrist would ache immediately. Your bones would begin to ache, and your hand would burn, as if the water were a transmutation of fire that feeds on stones and burns with a dark gray flame. If you tasted it, it would first taste bitter, then briny, then surely burn your tongue. It is like what we imagine knowledge to be. Dark, salt, clear, moving, utterly free, drawn from the cold, hard mouth of the world, derived from the rocky breasts forever, flowing and drawn, and since our knowledge is historical, flowing and flown.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I'm a senior in the English department, and I'm going to be reading The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. I chose this poem because one of my least favorite questions to get as a senior is, what are you going to do next year? And so one of the ways I kind of would de-stress from that was to go on walks. very similar to Thoreau, I like to think. And I would just kind of, pretend it wasn't an issue and go on these walks and think about anything else. But it did make me realize the importance of kind of putting aside any sort of stress that may be hanging over your head and just the importance of being in the moment. And I think this poem really gets at that very eloquently. So, the summer day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
I'm Victor Strandberg, faculty member, and I've chosen a poem by Reynolds Price, my greatly eminent colleague at Duke for almost, over 40 years. This poem will be, I think, the most erotic poem, a bit risque. It's titled Jonathan's Lament for David. And for those of you who didn't go to Sunday school, I should explain a point or two. Everyone's heard about David killing Goliath. Then he knocked out, made Goliath unconscious, swinging a stone at his forehead. Went up and took Goliath's sword and cut off Goliath's head. And this poem begins with David presenting the head of the giant to King Saul. Jonathan, the king's son, falls in love at first sight as we begin this poem. And then it's a flashback about their relationship, the two men falling in love. Toward the end of the poem, we find out what broke up the great love affair. It turns out to be David's political ambition. Being a very smart cookie, he married the king's daughter, who would be Jonathan's sister. It's very typical of Reynolds. He had two fundamental subjects. One was his Christian faith, and the other was erotic passion. And in a way, he combines them because we begin with a biblical passage about David and Jonathan from the book of Samuel. This is in the poem. When David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you?" David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." It happened when he finished speaking to Saul that Jonathan's soul was knit with David's soul. Jonathan loved him like his own soul. The first book of Samuel, chapter 17. Jonathan's lament for David. You, young in the bronze day, gore to the wrists, coarse hair kinked in the cold sweat of triumph, thrusting the startled head at father, pumpkin huge, with turquoise earbobs, chinking bells. You, rank with the first wild stench of manhood roasting your fork. It happened, I loved you. Watch my heart fling thin cords past the grinning giants and bind you in. Watch yours bind me, safe in the first and strongest bond. You were 14, herd boy still. I was 19, prince and heir. I had prided myself on self-possession. In the wheedling, murderous alleys of court, I owned my own soul, long-thewed body. No man's boy to fetch and carry, no milky girls to trap and tame. A love to outrun love of girls. We only flourished, fed by the glare of priests' eyes, kings and cringing slaves, the packed hot floors of muffled rooms, cool caves, dry bivouac beds on rock. The first taut chords of meeting eyes became twined legs and hands, locked lips, pooled opal seed we planted deep, buried to bloom in secret night, public deeds of sunstruck valor, love past woman's love, or God's, and proved through daily fierce onslaught, palace, tent, every hand, father's envy, Samuel's rage, our blank despair at shrinking ground, on which to join and feed again the single stalk bent desert tree we bred to last on air and night. Love past every human love. Till now, you rise in gilding light and stretch your brown, blunt victor's arms, assume the bleached, dense marriage shirt to take my sister, your first bride, grading head thrust toward me, swapping me for one pale girl, my nursery mate, your throne-ward calf. This love, gazelle to bound all crags, breaks, gored, on thorns of our killed tree.
They flee from me that sometime did me seek, with naked foot stalking in my chamber. I have seen them gentle, tame, and meek, that now are wild, and do not remember that sometime they put themselves in danger to take bread at my hand. And now they range, busily seeking with a continual change. Thanked be fortune, it hath been otherwise 20 times better. But once in special, in thin array, after a pleasant guise, when her loose gown from her shoulders did fall, and she me caught in her arms long and small, therewithal sweetly did me kiss, and softly said, Dear heart, how like you this? It was no dream, I lay broad waking, but all is turned through my gentleness into a strange fashion of forsaking. And I have leave to go of her goodness, and she also to use newfangleness. But since that I so kindly am served, I would fain know what she hath deserved.
Good evening. My name is Roshni Jane, and I'm a senior in the English department. And tonight I'll be reading a poem called The More Loving One by W.H. Auden. This poem is about man or human's relationship with stars, which are one of my favorite elements in nature. A quick story, when I was 3 years old, we moved from Chicago to Parsons, Kansas, which is a very small town of 10,000 people. And on our journey from Chicago to Parsons, we took a small plane from O'Hare to this town called Joplin, Missouri, which is a small city, I guess you could call it. And it was an hour's drive from there to Parsons, so quite the journey. And so when we got off the small plane after this very turbulent plane ride, I looked up, this is how my mother tells the story, of course, I was 3, I don't recall it myself. But we get off this plane and I look up into the sky, and according to my mother, I ask her what these bright lights are doing in the sky. Because in Chicago, you can't see the stars. And ever since then, I've just been like, my stars are, not my stars, the stars are like my favorite thing to look at in the night sky. Even now, When I go home to Kansas for breaks, I like to sit out on my porch, often with my sister, and we just look up at the sky and, enjoy the stars. And okay, so without further ado, The More Loving One by W.H. Auden. Looking up at the stars, I know quite well that for all they care, I can go to hell. But on earth indifference is the least we have to dread from man or beast. How should we like it were stars to burn with a passion for us we could not return? If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Admirer as I think I am, of stars that do not give a damn, I cannot, now I see them, say, I missed one terribly all day. Were all stars to disappear or die, I should learn to look at an empty sky and feel its total dark sublime, though this might take me a little time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yemi Adewi, and I am a junior in the Public Policy Department, so not English. So I'm actually going to read these 3 poems first, and then I'll talk about them. The first is entitled, The Rose That Grew from Concrete. Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete, when no one else ever cared. The second one is called, Can You See the Pride in the Panther? As he grows in splendor and grace, toppling obstacles placed in the way of the progression of his race. Can you see the pride in the panther? As she nurtures her young all alone, the seed must grow regardless of the fact that it is planted in stone. Can you see the pride in the panthers as they unify as one? The flower blooms with brilliance and outshines the rays of the sun. So, before I read the third one, I just want to ask, does anyone know who wrote those poems?
Is that Tupac?
Yeah, those are Tupac Shakur. And the particular reason why I chose these poems is because, especially this semester, but throughout my undergraduate career, I've been learning to expand my definition of what constitutes poetry, because I think when I make value judgments about what is and is not good poetry, that I first have to interrogate these notions of access, because, the kind of poetry that someone who grew up in East Harlem, like that kind of poetry that they have access to, is different from the poetry that someone who has a PhD in English from Yale, So I think those are very different, and understanding that and looking at that, I have to look at how poetry is a way of expanding my emotional vocabulary, a way of me thinking about ideas in ways I haven't before. The idea of resilience in the face of continued oppression, that image of a rose that grows even in concrete. All the odds are still against you and you still manage to flourish. I think is extremely beautiful idea. And for those who don't know, Tupac was a rapper who was active in the 90s, was assassinated in 1996. And so this last poem that I will read, the title is Liberty Needs Glasses. Excuse me, but Lady Liberty needs glasses, and so does Mrs. Justice by her side. Both the broads are as blind as bats, stumbling through the system. Justice bumped into Matulu and tripping on Geronimo Pratt, but stepped right over Oliver and his crooked partner Ronnie. Justice stubbed her big toe on Mandela, and Liberty was misquoted by the Indians. Slavery was the learning phase, forgotten without a verdict. While justice is on a rampage, for endangered surviving black males, I mean really, if anyone really valued life and cared about the masses, they take them both to Penn Optical and get them 2 pairs of glasses.
I went to graduate school at a most peculiar time, a time of heightened self-consciousness and reflexivity, when all poems were about poems and all text about text. Well, I'm a romanticist, finally, with a capital R. And not all, and I've learned to love a lot that is not about itself, about art, about the relationship between one genre and another genre. But some are. I almost left graduate school. I didn't leave because I had a chance to teach Dickinson. I had a chance to teach Dickinson with President Brodhead. So for him, I would not paint a picture. I'd rather be the one in its bright impossibility to dwell delicious on, and wonder how the fingers feel whose rare celestial stir evokes so sweet a torment, such sumptuous despair. I would not talk like hornets. I'd rather be the one raised softly to the ceilings and out and easy on through villages of ether, myself endued balloon, by but a lip of met to peer to my pontoon. Nor would I be a poet, is finer, only ear, enamored, impotent, content, the license to revere a privilege so awful. What would the dower be had I the art to stun myself with bolts of melody? I brought something else. These is for my students instead of for my teachers. I never understood why my select version of Langston Hughes did not have this poem in it until I discovered the poem. Just as I never understood how I took all those courses on African American Lit and nobody taught me George Schuyler's Black No More. Just as I took all those courses on African American cultural expressiveness and nobody played for me a single song of Oscar Brown Jr. Anyway, this is called Jazzonia. Oh, silver tree, oh, shining rivers of the soul, in a Harlem cabaret, 6 long-headed jazzers play. A dancing girl whose eyes are bold lifts high a dress of silken gold. Oh, singing tree, oh, shining rivers of the soul. Were Eve's eyes in the first garden just a bit too bold? Was Cleopatra gorgeous in a gown of gold? Oh, shining tree, oh, silver rivers of the soul. In a whirling cabaret, 6 long-headed jazzers play.
I'm so overwhelmed with the wealth of emotion and passion for poetry that I've seen today. Thank you to all of our readers within the English department and our guest artists from outside of English. I want to say a word of introduction before our final reader comes up to the podium, Professor Maureen Quilligan, because many of us, as we know, are seniors or students in general, reflecting at the end of the year on what our career at Duke has been like. And Professor Quilligan is graduating as well. She's retiring this year from an illustrious career at Duke. And anything that I could say to sing her praises would be completely insufficient, but I do want to say just a quick reflection on the impression she's made on my life. There are 2 moments from my first year at Duke that stand out to me. The first is in the Medieval and Renaissance Focus program, when through a semester of seminars with Maureen, I developed the love for Shakespeare that is carrying me now into graduate school, something that I intend to study for the rest of my life. And the second is the English department Halloween party, when she gave such a frightening rendition of Macbeth's witches, bubble, bubble, boil, and trouble, that I have never, ever doubted her ability to deliver poetry.
Very sweet. Thank you so much. I'm graduating. And it's somewhat the same bittersweet feeling that I'm sure you seniors have, and also it's a little terrifying too. And I must say, I can't help, because you brought up this is the end. The very first English department meeting, was a small meeting, it wasn't a full department meeting, I ever went to in my life was at perhaps not to be mentioned, Yale University. And there was a very nice young man there who was 1 year ahead of me in teaching, leading a conversation about what it was like to teach a class that was going to take us from Chaucer to Wallace Stevens, English in 25, I think it was. And I was very, very nervous at the time. I thought, can I do this? Here I am, this is really scary. And as the fellow kept talking and asking other people what they were doing, I said, oh, I could do this. Yes, this is exactly what I signed up for. And is this the way all meetings are going to be? And it was Dick. I have a favorite writer who writes poems occasionally, but who writes wonderful novels. And I wanted to share with you a piece of prose from my favorite 20th century author, Michael Malone, that I think is a sort of the baseline for what language on the page always ought to do, and many times doesn't. This is chapter 14, Wednesday, January 19th. A poor pink started to wash through that blue-black opulence the sky has just before dawn, and I had come out of the little hills of the Piedmont and passed in the night with the trucks, the scruffy little egg and hog farms, ramshackle and leached fields, the red clay and corn stubble and piney gum woods, lifelong familiar and so invisible. East on 64, I was sloping down into coastal lowlands, into flat earth fallow for the bright leaf tobacco, and for cotton, the old king, throneless since Appomattox, like Bonnie Prince Charlie after Culloden War. Wind was cold off the bright water of Albemarle Sound. Far away, the wakes of Manhattan and shrimp boats already ruffled, luring the white gulls down. As I met the ocean, the sun blew up over the horizon, and I turned south off the causeway into the wilderness preserve of the Outer Banks. I was alone on the road for an hour. Shafts of sea oats bowed shaking to a sandy highway that warned of the dangers of leaving it.
The roses grew from concrete. nature's laws wrong. It learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams